Hi guys, John from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey, and I want to talk to you guys today about crawl spaces. So the crawl spaces that I'm going to be talking about today are crawl spaces under your house. There's sometimes clients or people confuse a crawl space in an attic, so that's not the crawl space I'm talking about. I'm talking about a short basement that's under your house. And that's where a lot of issues occur. And when it's really important that you have a home inspector who can get in there, who is willing to get into that crawl space. And certainly there's rules governing the kind of spaces that a home inspector can get in safely. So there are some parameters. But for the most part, you really want to try to get somebody who is willing and able to get under the space in under your house, because that, generally speaking, is going to be where a lot of the issues are going to be found. I mean, think about it. You have a space under your house. It's dark. It's dingy. Sometimes it has mold. Sometimes it has a dirt floor. There's no lighting a lot of the times, and you're just not going to spend a lot of time in that space. In fact, you're probably going to avoid it. But this is where the home inspector comes in. This is where we sort of butter our bread, right? Is to get into these spaces where most of the population or public doesn't want to enter. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong in a crawl space. And the first thing we're going to look at, and I try to figure out, is it a dry crawl space or is it a wet crawl space? Are we getting water penetration inside the space? And that's crucially important, just like we would inspect a basement. A crawl space may even be more important for moisture or water penetration because the occupants of the house are not going to readily see the problem. And this is a big problem. We want to make sure that the crawl space is dry. Is there a water control system in the crawl space? Is there a sump pump, a drain system? Sometimes crawl spaces, they just take on a lot of water, and over the years and years of that water entering, that high moisture, we see a lot of framing, a lot of mold problems, and just a lot of issues in general, causing problems with the health and safety of the home. So water entry into the crawl space is really paramount for home inspector. And home inspectors here in New Jersey are going to certainly be looking carefully to determine if there's going to be any kind of water penetration. So things we can look at are water stains on the interior walls of the crawl space. We can look for efflorescence, just like we would in a basement. So efflorescence is that sort of that white, fluffy material on the interior walls. And that's generally white, of course, and it just indicates that moisture is present there. And that just gives us an indication, to look a little bit further. We could also use our moisture meters and look at the framing inside the crawl space to see if that's not compromised. We always obviously want to make sure that we don't have any water damage there. So especially around the sill plate, I'm going to be using my probe or big screwdriver, and I'm going to be periodically hitting that sill plate to make sure that that sill plate and the box plate, the ends of the joists, they're not compromised in any way. Especially if we have a crawl space and a structure that's low to the ground. So sometimes you'll find your sill plate and box plate very close to the level of the soil, and you won't have much of a buffer zone. You won't have that 6 or 8 inches offset there. And that just allows for snow and ice to kind of collect around that house or that addition, whatever the crawl space is under, and that moisture can actually wick into that sill plate, box plate, joist ends over time. And that's something that home inspectors here in New Jersey really need to, pay attention to. So these are things that are super, super important in a crawl space. So we're for sure looking for moisture. We're looking for water entry into that crawl space. Another thing that we're looking for are pests. And there's a wide variety of pests that can enter the space. So Although we're not environmental inspectors, certainly we can call out if we see animal droppings in a crawl space, rodent droppings in a crawl space, right? And we're looking for also termite and carpenter ant activity because this space is generally neglected space under a house. Many times carpenter ant activity and termite activity, they don't get found until the home inspection. So again, we're using our big probe and we're doing a thorough termite and WDI inspection of the framing inside the crawl space. So we're looking for the termite mud tubes, we're looking for the carpenter ant frass, we're probing the wood diligently to make sure that it's not compromised and we don't have any soft wood or compromised wood caused by, termites or carpenter ants. So that's a big piece of the crawl space inspection as well, is looking for pests. And certainly we don't want any mice, we don't want any vermin. Anything that's going to leave droppings or urine in the space is going to compromise the general health of the house and the health of the occupants in the home. So when I see that type of thing, and I see that often in crawl spaces, because don't forget, a rodent can get into a very, very small space. And take, for example, your pinky size. A rodent can squeeze their body into a size about that big, that big around, and it's very, very small. And once in the home, rodents and other pests, their job is to make additional rodents and pests. So then you kind of have this cycle continuing. So it's crucially important that we do that. We find these issues. Another common issue that I find in crawl spaces is cave cricket activity, or what we call camel crickets. And these are those big crickets that you go into the space and they kind of jump at you, and they love it when it's high in moisture and it's dark. So that's really their environment. So I've seen really crawl space walls or ceilings that are just covered with these camel crickets. And trust me, you don't really want these guys entering your house. They're not destructive in a way that termites and carpenter ants are. They're just more of a nuisance. And nobody really wants to squash a couple of these big guys once they're walking around your kitchen floor. So good home inspectors here in New Jersey are also going to alert you to the fact if you have this type of activity, camel crickets, right? And we're going to be looking for the excrement that has a certain type of excrement, a certain signature also, and that we're going to be definitely looking for that. And I think that's really important to sort of bring that to light. So another thing that we find in crawl space a lot of the time is insulation that is not present, or insulation that is just fallen down off of the crawl space ceiling. So we have two issues a lot of times with bat style insulation, which is what you guys are familiar with. It's sort of Owens Corning insulation. Other manufacturers obviously make it too, but it's that fiberglass insulation that's tucked up into the ceiling joist bays, and that's usually there. It's either stapled or there's metal guy wires that hold it up. And because the crawl spaces, a lot of the times they'll have a lot of high moisture conditions, that insulation will take in that moisture. It'll saturate that insulation, and the insulation will fall down. And you'll see a lot of insulation on the floor of the crawl space. And we find this all the time, like a lot. And so we want to make sure that the crawl space is properly insulated. And one of the things that we look for too is if that insulation is still intact on the crawl space ceiling. Is it installed correct, or is it installed upside down or backwards, right? So we want the vapor barrier to be against the hot side, right, of the crawl space. So that means the vapor barrier or paper of the insulation should be facing upwards. So I should see fluffy insulation if you're traversing my crawl space. But many times, because it's easier too, because you have sort of those wings on the side of the insulation, it's easier to install it backwards, right? You're just going to staple those paper wings and put the insulation on upside down. And what that creates is high moisture conditions right against the underside of the crawl space ceiling, right? So we don't want that. So I do my best when I enter the crawl space is to try to pull down some of the insulation just to look above it, because many times I'll find, mold-like substances, mold up in that area, or I'll find high moisture. So I'll take my moisture meter out and I'll put my moisture meter against the ceiling of the crawl space where I pull the insulation down, and then you have high moisture. We don't want that. So we have to be careful with insulation in crawl spaces and doing our due diligence with trying to determine what's behind it. And I know that the regulations say you don't have to remove the insulation. I'm not talking about removing all of the insulation, of course. I'm talking about periodically just going in there and taking down that insulation and looking above it. I think that that's really important to do that. And we touched on it previously, but I'm looking for mold also in crawl spaces. So we don't want to have a high mold condition in a crawl space, either on the ceiling, on the walls, on the framing, on the beams. And this happens a lot because we don't have, a lot of the times, the proper dehumidification inside the crawl space. There won't be any dehumidifier running in the space. It'll just kind of be open, high moisture. If it's improperly vented, that moisture will just stagnate and collect. And once it stagnates and collects, then we have conditions that are conducive to mold growth. And that's all a lot of the time. So we're looking for mold also. And I know that we are not doing environmental inspection. However, in my opinion, we need to tell our client if we see or suspect mold. It's just something that we should do. Even though it's not required, I think it's important. So we want to make sure that we're looking for any kind of mold, especially if it's above the ceiling insulation, because what the occupants are actually breathing, some of that air originates inside the crawl space, because generally you have an upward movement of air trajectory where air from the crawl space or basement is moving upward in a home. And guess what? You're breathing that in the kitchen, living room, dining room of the house if you have a mold-infested crawl space under that. So crucially important. Your client doesn't want to move into a home and not know that there's a mold problem there, for sure. So along with that is dehumidification, right? If we see these kind of things, we need to make sure that we're recommending a dehumidifier or crawl space water control system, because we want to keep our humidity levels below 50%. If the client can keep the humidity levels under 45%, 40%, you're even better off. But really the goal, let's keep it at 50%, and that will help control any kind of hot air humidity problems in the crawl space. So that's also very, very important. Another thing we're looking at inside a crawl space is electrical problems. And electrical problems can be just remain there for a long time. Many times I'll go in a crawl space and I'll see open wires, I'll see improper splicing, I'll see hanging down wires, live wires just on the floor of the crawl space. And I don't know, I guess the reason is because nobody goes in the space. And if you're doing electrical work, you're really less likely to do it in a way that's neat and clean and proper if you're down inside a crawl space. Now listen, most electrical contractors will do very good work. I'm not saying that. But when you have sort of a handyman or the homeowner doing electrical work in the crawl space, it generally can be a little bit haphazard. So this is something that we're looking for also as home inspectors. We're making sure that there's no really glaring electrical deficiencies, hazards, or fire hazards, down in that space. So that's definitely an issue. We're also looking for structural problems inside the crawl space. And I've had many instances where you see all kind of crazy things supporting the crawl space beam. I've had jacks multiple times. I've had standard car jacks and bottle jacks holding that up. I've had just kind of a lot of misplaced shims and patio blocks and all kinds of crazy things, piping holding up the beam. Just there's a lot of things that people will put under a beam to support the structure in a crawl space. And I guess they do that because they believe that nobody is going to go down there and take a look. So one of the things that we're going to do as home inspectors here in New Jersey is to make sure that the structure has good integrity down in the space. Do the load paths make sense? You know, besides checking for wood rot and other framing problems, we're going to be looking at that beam inside the crawl space to make sure that there are proper columns and there should be proper footings under those columns. So those are the things that are crucially important. We want to make sure that the house is structurally sound. And a lot of times we won't find footings. We'll find all kinds of crazy things, you know, that people think are footings, and they're not, you know, they're not footings at all. And we also have to watch out for the basement, the crawl space lolly columns or support columns. Many times, because of the high moisture conditions in the space, they'll just be rusted out. So the jacket of these columns will be completely rusted out if they are actually properly configured columns. Many times you'll see, temporary columns or screw style, columns in these space. See that, all the time as well. So in a crawl space, and if it's a dirt crawl space, we want to make sure that we are tamping down moisture conditions as best we can. So I want to see a vapor barrier on that crawl space floor. And it's got to be homogeneous. It's got to be continuous. Basically, hopefully run up the walls as well, because we want to make sure that our moisture stays at a reasonable level. So having a vapor barrier in conjunction with a dehumidifier can definitely help in this case. So I want to see a vapor barrier and a dirt. I don't want to see open dirt. And if I see a vapor barrier, I want it to be in good condition. I don't want it to be sporadic. And sometimes you go into a crawl space and, the vapor barrier's half there and half missing, and it's ripped and it's just in really poor condition, or it looks like you put a bunch of ShopRite bags out or something like that. So it's not really what we want to see. We want to see a nice, thick 6 mil vapor barrier on that crawl space floor to help tamp down moisture. So that's crucially, important as well. Another thing that is concerning to me is when I go to a house and I have a space under, say, an addition or a portion of the home that I can't see. I can't get in it because it's walled off, it's boxed in. There is maybe an access that's caulked in, it's glued, it's got 1,000 screws in it. I just can't get that thing off. That concerns me, because if you guys are buying a house with a crawl space that's not accessible, that should be a red flag. It's definitely a red flag to me and other home inspectors here in New Jersey. We want to make sure that we can see any area that's under that house. So if an area is inaccessible and it's inaccessible and you're buying that home, you should, before the home inspection, make sure that that area is made accessible and open so your home inspector can enter or at least view that area so you know what you're getting into. Definitely a red flag. And when I have this type of thing, and I have it more than you would imagine, I always document that in the home inspection report that I cannot view these areas. And good home inspectors are trained to also do this. We have to list our limitations as far as accessibility. And if I can't get into an area, if I can't see an area, I'm going to tell you I can't see it. Make that area accessible. Maybe we can come back and inspect it again, or maybe you can inspect it. Maybe you can view it at some point later on. But the best way to do it is to make that area accessible. Have somebody inspect it professionally before you close on the home, because you're opening yourself up to all kind of problems if you have an area that you can't see under your house. Big problem. So I just wanted you guys to have basically a little bit of an overview, and there are more things. Certainly, crawl spaces along with basements are one of the key areas of a house that a home inspector is going to be really spending a lot of their time with. They're certainly very, very important, because a lot of the times they're neglected and people just don't enter these spaces. So if you have any questions about your house, a house you're buying, or crawl spaces in general, I'm John Martino from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey. Reach out if you can. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.